Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time for Blockheads, where we look at some of the major headlines to come out in the crypto and blockchain dedicated press. With me to break down these stories today is Asher Westrop-Evans, senior analyst and correspondent at BLOCKTV. Asher, a bunch of good stories came across last few hours, especially in response to yesterday's mean dip in the market. But that's not the only news. But we want to start there, right? We got Tom Lee chiming in there.
Certainly, yeah. So starting, coming from the outlet You Today, we've got the headline, Tom Lee talks massive Bitcoin price drop, claims it confirms Fundstrat's unpopular theory. Now, the theory that he's referring to there is the idea that, sort of converse to the view that's been put on, that Bitcoin is a risk-off investment. It's now a safe haven. People are going to turn to it in times of strife. He now says, no, that's not being true, that narrative has never held up, that in fact, as we saw in equities, the equities drop yesterday, and again, this is the sort of theory that was espoused by the likes of Matty Greenspan yesterday, Bitcoin followed in the same notion. He goes on to extend the theory, saying that new highs will be needed in the S&P 500 before Bitcoin can blast off again. Saying that there is inherently tied on, it's still considered risk on, and we need those people to feel like, those investors to feel like they can put a little risky investment out into the world for Bitcoin to see those new highs. But interesting that he's tying it directly to equity market.
And like you said, we had Matty Greenspan from eToro on yesterday, and he kind of pointed to that correlation. But he's consistently and repetitively, and he doesn't shy away from that. Bitcoin is uncorrelated, so compared to, you can't compare it to gold, you can't compare it to traditional equity markets. It stands by itself. But here, Thomas Lee saying that it is in a way.
Look, what he's saying, I mean, I guess what he's saying, to give credit to him, he's not necessarily saying it is inherently correlated to equities, but saying that there is a correlation in the fact that it's still considered risk on, that it's still considered a risky investment, that people are still concerned about putting their money into this sort of asset class at times when there is high risk and high volatility. If to say that in different market movements and in different ways it could enact in different ways, he's not saying it's inherently tied to equities, but in that sense, in this one element, he's saying that there is that relationship.
So right now, everybody should be looking at maybe even bigger picture issues to see what will impact the traditional markets, and then maybe Bitcoin and cryptos will follow.
Trade wars, some politicking, a lot going on in the US certainly to follow around the world.
All right, next up, we got a nice piece here by Decrypt. And they did some good old-fashioned journalism, called up some regulators and asked them what they know and what they think about Telegram soon to be launched.
And raising the point that the headline, how Telegram quietly snuck past its blockchain past regulators. I mean, the fact of the matter is this has gone under the radar, that particularly in the United States, the TON network that's set to open up by the end of October.
Really? We were talking about weeks?
Yeah, round the corner, and it's really just not on the radars of any of the particularly US and EU regulators. Perhaps a little bit more awareness in Russia itself and its home state, as it were, but still not a lot being focused on it. Many people not necessarily taking it seriously, and I mean, they should do, because as the article points out, they managed to raise $1.7 billion for this project, and they have 365 million users. That's a serious user base that Telegram can enact, and it has been controversial in the past. Let's not forget, Telegram has had a lot of controversy surrounding their steadfast holding to their principles of privacy. Something that they see as tantamount to their sort of main ethos as a company in regards to its users, which many regulators have criticized, saying that it allows nefarious actions to take place on the platform.
And just put money into that mix, and you're asking for trouble. But Decrypt also had a chance to interview some of the Telegram executives or programmers there, and they seem to be unconcerned with the regulation, right?
Exactly. I mean, they're just moving ahead, which is unsurprising given the ethos that they have, as part of that company. They're not guys that sort of sit and wait for regulators to say yes or no. They're I'm not going to say they're of a move fast and break things ilk in that Facebook sense, but they're certainly of it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission idea. They will go ahead, founded by Pavel Durov and the Durov brothers themselves, both part of this project. They have an ethos of being anti-regulation, anti the state, and they're continuing this in the money moves. And it's fascinating to see this when so many are concerned about Libra and its sort of empowering Facebook.
It's like they're able to do so just because all the spotlight is on Facebook.
If anything, that was a great boon to them, and they're able to get ahead and do what they wanted to do regardless. That being said, it's a question of even if regulators had wanted to stop them, would they be able to? It's a lot harder than Libra that's going to be associated with a lot of big companies that are directly linked and affiliated in the US. Obviously, Telegram is an entity that exists and it can be regulated, but it's going to be a lot harder given their sort of focus on privacy. They're working in the gray areas of the law in the past.
And what's your take? I mean, is it even too late at this stage? I mean, they're about to launch. They're not asking anybody's permission. They're going to go ahead and do it. And then, I mean, what do regulators do? And suddenly they have this, very large, very powerful company. People are allowed to trade in that as a currency, as an asset, again.
Right, and this is not a stable coin right here. This is a fully speculative asset that they're putting out there. People have already begun trading in a secondary market before formal trading has begun. Will it be stopped? I mean, it effectively in some ways already exists. Once it's out and in fullest form, will regulators be able to stop it? Look, Ron, I mean, I'm not an expert in the sort of the criminality and sort of the controls that can be put in place here, but I can tell you it looks hard to do, given they haven't been able to stop Telegram and a lot of the activities that they have wanted in its messaging form. In a payments form, it looks tricky to do, though it might be on the grey areas of regulation.
And also noted in that Decrypt story is that the Durov brothers aren't even, or anybody at Telegram really isn't addressing this. Nobody's promoting it. They're not marketing it in a major way. I mean, it
seems to be fulfilling its own need. I mean, it seems to be raising its own interest. They never even formally announced the $1.7 billion in funding they got. It just leaked out through investors. I mean, this is all coming secondhand. So they're going to do what the Durov brothers do.
We're obviously going to watch out for that one in the next few weeks to come. Next, from Telegram and to Facebook itself, David Marcus making headlines. The Block Crypto.
Yeah, the Block Crypto stating that Facebook's David Marcus justifies building a payments network on blockchain instead of a traditional banking system. Right. So, I mean, look, this is a classic case of selling to the mainstream, the Main Street, Wall Street sort of financial world, and saying this is why it's useful, that it's provide low-cost access to financial services for the masses. Again, that's been part of Libra's stated aims and goals since it was formally declared back earlier in the year. I mean, this is very in keeping, but part of the sales pitch that Marcus is really trying to push forward.
But it's worth noting we haven't heard too much from Libra and from Facebook.
No, certainly to get any sort of statement is impressive. And he says that people, and I quote, people would benefit from more ease when they would send and receive money, and the barrier to access modern digital money and financial services would be greatly lowered. It's the same line that we have heard in the past. It was in their white paper. It was from the beginning. But at the same time, again, as you say, we haven't heard much from them. For them to come out with this angle really shows that that's what they're still promoting. That's the through line that they're trying to say. We're enabling, accessible financial services.
Now, as far as the time frame in this case, there's a bit less clarity when it comes to that. And apropos, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg gave an interview and talked about it. Right?
Exactly. So Zuckerberg gave an interview to the Nikkei Asian Review, in which he sort of dodged a lot of the questions that were thrown at him regarding Libra and the Libra project.
And that was also, it wasn't the main focus of the interview.
No, to be fair, it wasn't the main focus, but he did dodge around a lot of the answers he gave, not giving a lot of clarity, as he's wont to do. I mean, and perhaps maybe is appropriate in this instance, but he stated, the one sort of quote we can take was he stated, obviously we want to move forward at some point soon and not have this take many years to roll out, but right now I'm really focused on making sure we do this well. So a vague statement, to say the least.
2020 is fairly soon, but it's also not a few.
What is soon? How does soon manifest? I don't know, but we've heard, heard from the CEO back in Ethereal that they're aiming now for the second half of 2020, so a bit of a pushback from that first half 2020 aim. So obviously that signals that they're open to changing time frames.
Well, we heard that already from Tomer Barel at Ethereal a week ago, and now the man himself is non-committal.
Exactly.
All right, another bit of a macro story or a look at Bitcoin from the Long Hash.
Yes, so the Long Hash has stated with the headline, Bitcoin isn't the safe haven for Chinese investors we thought it was. And again, this is playing into that narrative that really has taken a hit in the last few days, weeks, however you want to say it, that Bitcoin is not that safe haven that Chinese investors can turn to. Many speculated that given the trade war, that it could be a good access point for Chinese investors to hedge some of their their finances in a sort of choppy economic and trade waters. They could use Bitcoin as a means to hedge, but with the steep falls that we've seen, it's now going to be much trickier for that to be a justifiable means and action for the Chinese to take on board Bitcoin as a means of safe haven hedging in their markets.
And we saw that the traditional safe haven asset, we're talking about gold, performed as maybe could be expected.
Exactly. We've seen gold. We've seen even the Japanese yen often seen as a safe haven asset, given its security and stability. There are many who are saying that these classic safe havens, I mean, we can see that they're rising. We can see that people are turning to those safe havens at this time, but at the moment, they're not willing to turn to Bitcoin. I guess there's an interesting point that needs to be made here, though, because although there are concerns of maybe an equities crunch, there isn't yet in a lot of these countries, in a lot of sort of established countries, a market and concern of sort of a monetary crunch, a financial issue, which is like we had, for example, in the Euro crisis back in sort of 2010-11 and up to 2014. And we did see investors in Portugal, in Spain, in Greece, some did turn to Bitcoin as a potential place to store assets. Obviously, while the Chinese may be devaluing the renminbi, they're not, at this time, it's not a massive inflationary collapse. They're not changing the whole currency market. People's savings aren't at risk. So in that sense, people are still willing to trust the local currency.
Interesting. But if we're saying that Bitcoin isn't a safe haven, and it's not functioning all that hot as a means of exchange.
What is it, Ron?
Well, we explore that every day.
Wildcard.
BLOCKTV. And last one for today, we've got a story by CoinDesk, kind of wrapping up the early days of Backed, saying it's not as bad as we think.
Yeah, look, the headline, Backed slow start doesn't mean Bitcoin futures have flopped. And you know what? I agree with Galen Moore on this one. I don't think it's flopped. I think you build the highway, people will come. That's the sort of market we're seeing right now. We've had the CME trading futures for a long time. They've been doing it quite successfully in the Bitcoin market. And I think that given time, Backed can achieve the same goals. That being said, looking at today's trading charts for Backed futures.
How many?
One. Just one so far today. The day's still young, it's still early morning in the US, and the day starts, according to them, 8 p.m. To 6 p.m.
Still, it's half 10 hours of trading.
Exactly, and we've only had one contract be executed. It's not great, Ron, but given the current state of the market as a whole, maybe the institutional investors aren't that eager to jump in on the great savings they could potentially make on a dip. Maybe they don't quite see it like that. They want to see a little bit more stability. So maybe on the next surge, we'll see Backed ready and prepared to take on.
So the highway's there. Bring the drivers. Asher, thanks very much. That was an awesome breakdown of some of the top stories of today. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more blockchain and cryptocurrency news.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.